Good evening, friends, and a warm aloha. What is it the Christian calls being converted? Well, I don't know. The Orthodox Christian undoubtedly means, as a rule, getting the feeling of wanting to join a church. On the other hand, a real idea of conversion would be the descent of the Holy Ghost or attainment of some measure of Christ consciousness. Actually, a conversion would be the very thing that we said this afternoon was our goal. The movement out of material consciousness into spiritual consciousness. That moment of transition when one stops being a human being governed by material beliefs and laws and comes into the awareness of spirit as the real law and the real government of the universe. That would be a real conversion. However, like everything else in the religious world, words have been changed around so much so that sometimes a person feels they've been converted when they've come around to believing that they should join a church or give up their religion for some other religion. But conversion really and truly means that point of consciousness where the Christ enters and one becomes spiritual instead of material. During meditation, I sometimes get a feeling of heat or fire. I find I'm becoming very telepathic, and though I'm not seeking occult development, what is happening? Well, sometimes this feeling of warmth or fire is just a spiritual glow that comes at first and then gradually doesn't appear anymore, or where it is accompanied with this sense of telepathy. It might mean tuning in on the occult plane. Now, there's only one way to overcome that. There's no use of a person mingling or remaining on that occult plane. That means the plane of communing with dead people and getting messages that have more or less of no real permanent benefit or interest. There is a use, there is a purpose in the ability to see into mind and its activities and operation. There's no question about that. There is a great value in it, even on the human plane, because it sometimes reveals, well, just as the Master was able to see ahead and talk about Nathaniel, read the mind of Nathaniel, read the mind of the disciples, be able to tell them where to go and find the donkey that he was going to ride into town. There's a value in that. It isn't in and of itself a tremendous spiritual experience, but it has a value, a practical value in some of our day-to-day affairs, because it enables us to see ahead into dangers and things of that kind. It all depends what use is made of it, and it all depends on its method of coming into our experience. Now, first of all, let me say this. It isn't wisdom to remain on that plane of, we'll call it spiritualism. There is a greater consciousness, and that is a spiritual consciousness. And the way to tune into that is this. In meditation, begin immediately with this realization: I'm not seeking effect, I'm not seeking experience, I'm not seeking anything in the outer realm. I'm seeking my at-one-ment with cause, with God, with Spirit, with the infinite source of creation. I'm tuning in consciously to that one universal divine mind, that soul of the universe, or consciousness of the universe. And as you persist in that, you will break through that level that some people get stuck on, the occult or spiritualistic level, and you will break through to the spiritual. Even then, you may have the experience of what has been termed telepathy, but that will be in the nature of a helpful thing, not a harmful thing, and it will come usually with a good purpose. There is where you get your foundation for prophecy. If our old ancient prophets hadn't been able to see coming human events, they wouldn't have been prophets. But they were able to see coming human events, but they were able to see it because in their attunement with mind, with life, with the soul, they also saw the violation of truth going on in human consciousness, and they were able to prophesy what the end was going to be. You might just as well call it occult. If the Hebrew prophets tell one city after another of their destruction, or later on when the prophecies come out about Babylon, Rome, Greece, you call that occult if you like, but nevertheless, those who made those prophecies were in tune with the infinite, and it was only because of their contact with that infinite that they were able to see that the violation of spiritual law was going to result in this other. In the same way that if you saw a person stealing day in and day out, you could also be a prophet and prophesy that they're going to end up in jail. And there's anything occult about it. You're witnessing the violation of a law, and of course you know the penalty for it, and you know that it can't be avoided forever. And so when you are attuned to the Spirit and you witness the world in rebellion against it, in opposition to it, it's a very easy thing to see and foresee coming events. And that makes you a prophet, although at the time you're doing it, especially in this age, you might be called a witch or an occultist or something of that kind that has a nasty meaning. Actually, there should be nothing wrong about the word or term occultist or occultism. It means the mysterious, that's true, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean the evil mysterious. It can be a very good mysterious. I am sure that before the days of wireless telegraphy, that was mysterious. It may also have been called occult, but it wasn't, isn't, it's a part of intelligence. Now then, to fool around with that part of occultism that has an evil basis or purpose, or a non-constructive one, isn't, of course, wisdom at all. And so we want no part of that. We want no part of that part of the priesthood that we call the evil, as I have explained in some classes, that when they had the old spiritual healing in the Hawaiian Islands, they had a double system down there. They had good kahunas and bad kahunas. The good kahunas were the ones you went to when you wanted healing. The bad kahunas were the ones you went to when you wanted some rival or some enemy killed. Okay? They had both, and they both operated openly and legitimately, but one was for a good purpose and one was for an evil. It was only that they knew mental powers, and they knew that you could use mental powers for good and you could use mental powers for evil, and you can while you're on the human plane. In any of these mental teachings, mental sciences, while it is possible to be healed mentally, you can also be made sick mentally, because you're just using the activity of the human mind and directing it in your own way. Just as you can imagine, for instance, take a teaching that says that you impress on the divine mind that you want $1,000, and the divine mind goes out and gets it for you. There's loads of those teachings here in this country. Well, now, it doesn't say there that you must want the $1,000 for a good purpose. You should just want the $1,000. Well, now, if it's true that you can impress on, whether it's the divine mind or the supermind or the subconscious mind or any other mind, if you can impress on it a desire for $1 even, and can get it that way, you can easily see that it could be used for good or evil, because you haven't outlined how that dollar or $1,000 is to be used. And if it's just going to get you $1,000, it's getting it for you without any moral or ethical sense. And so you find in all of the mental teachings, there is only the amount of ethics in the teaching that the student or teacher wishes to put in. Because if you can use it for good, you can use it for evil. Now that would not be true when you get through the mental level to the spiritual. You could never go to divine mind, to the real divine mind, to soul or spirit, for any personal or selfish purpose. There'd be no way to go to get $1,000 or $1 million or even $1. None at all. You could only open yourself to the wisdom of God. And of course, if the wisdom of God included dollars for your supply at that moment, you'd have an abundance of them. But in that case, you would not have the power to misuse them. That would never go with a gift of God, the power to misuse it. In fact, a gift of God would come with the power only to use it for good, and probably the power to destroy anyone who tried to use it in another way. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. The Spirit does not come to bring peace to any form of wrong use or misuse at any time. And therefore, there is no possible way of making a spiritual demonstration of supply for an ignoble purpose, a selfish purpose, a mean purpose, a purely sensual purpose. It couldn't be done. You might do it mentally, but you can't do it spiritually. And that is why, when we come to demonstration in the spiritual science and the spiritual truth, we have to come with the understanding that we are not going for so much of so much, nor for the use of it in this way or that way. We are opening ourselves to a divine inflow. And if it's going to flow as dollars, it will. If it's going to flow as houses, it will. But be assured of this, that once it flows, it has to be kept in a channel of good, universal good, cosmic good, or you'd have every cosmic law in the world squeezing you down. Now, it is in the same way that it may very well be possible to seek health mentally, merely for the sake of having a healthy body, and then afterward do anything that one wanted with their body or with their health. But in seeking health spiritually, as it would come, consciousness would so open up to the spiritual realities that that body and that health would be used in a right way. I think that that was so well illustrated in that case that I told you about the other night, in my first year, when the lady came to me with syphilis and said that in the halfway through the treatment, I don't think God should heal me or would heal me, because I don't know whether I'll be better after I'm healed than I was before. I may sin again. And I explained the spiritual point to her, but the point was this: when that healing came, and I realized it and she realized it, or as a matter of fact, when she was talking about it that day, says, how do I know I won't have another sweetheart after I'm well as I was tempted before? And I said, well, let's not worry about that until it happens, and then we'll take up that matter. So after the healing had taken place, and she had been completely cleared by the 3 doctors and the Board of Health, and she came back to me and said, well, here I am, completely well and completely freed by these doctors. I turned around to her in my bad sense of humor, and I said, well, have you selected your next sweetheart? Of course, I was jesting, and she looked at me, in a shocked manner and said, oh, how can you say anything like that? How can you talk? Why, with this thing happening to you, how can you talk that way? This was a spiritual healing. And it was. That very next day she went out to a friend of ours whose husband had a paralyzed arm, and she never left that home until he was healed. Within a week, that lady was in the practice, and as I said the other night, she's still in the practice. She's still a professional practitioner and doing fine work. But you see, the physical healing wasn't really a physical healing, it was a spiritual healing, and she had no more powers after that healing to be other than what she is, a good healer, living a good life. So any time we turn to the spirit, to the soul, to God, we might as well make up our mind that we cannot use the good we receive for an evil purpose. It will not work out. It would destroy us, because the spirit comes with a sword to maintain the integrity of its own work. Now, should this persist for any length of time, this temptation to tune in on the wrong level, on the mental level, just turn within. And if any of you have any difficulty any time with meditation, getting on the wrong path, just make your declaration when you meditate, I am tuning in on the infinite. I am really realizing my conscious oneness with God, with the cause. I'm not interested in phenomena. I'm not interested in tricks. I'm not interested in black magic or white magic. I'm interested only in one thing, the conscious realization of my oneness with God, and whatever it is that God wishes to unfold and express and reveal within my being. And then you're on safe ground and you will tune in. The next thing is this, that if you have difficulty with it and do not meet it yourself, have help of someone who is tuned in on the spiritual level, because they can break it for you very, very quickly. Very, very quickly they can break that attachment to the wrong end. Well, that takes care of all of our questions, unless you have some more out there now. Voice them if you like. No, I can't do that. A cosmic law is a law of good, a law of love. Any law of love is a cosmic law. The greatest cosmic law there is do unto your neighbor as you would have your neighbor do unto you. Cosmic law, universal law of good. Yes. Yes. I suppose that in our world, our Occidental world, the highest type of soul-governed individual would be Jesus Christ. That's the one that we accept as the full and complete revelation of the soul faculty. Because he not only could see, hear, taste, touch, and smell with his physical sense of faculties, but he could discern the intents and purposes of the heart, which means of our inner being, of our mind, and he could go even further than that and be so consciously one with God that he knew all of the spiritual wisdom of the world and had full spiritual powers, such controls that he was able to heal multitudes, feed multitudes, and live a completely spiritual life while yet in the flesh. So he would be considered the very highest example of a soul-developed individual, or what we today call God-conscious individual. That's the same thing. Developed soul faculties or God consciousness is the same thing. Another illustration of that would be John, the man who was responsible for the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. Now, contrary to belief, that was not the disciple John. That was not the beloved disciple John. The John who was responsible for the Gospel of John and for the book of Revelation lived something like 100 years A.D., 120 years A.D., I believe those manuscripts are from. And there you have an evidence of a man who was at least the equal of Jesus, if he wasn't even greater in soul development. Not that he had a public ministry like Jesus, he never did, but that he attained the height of soul vision to the extent that we're told he beheld the temple, not made with hands, eternal in the heaven. He beheld the entire spiritual universe here and now, the temple not built with hands, eternal in the heavens. And evidently John had the complete spiritual vision which he says he received from Jesus Christ or from the Christ consciousness. And so that he was certainly, if he wasn't ahead, he may not have been ahead, but he was certainly in that class with Jesus of a very, very greatly developed soul. Now you have an example of one who also had a great development, but wasn't even in the same bracket with those two. Never came anywhere near it, and that was St. Paul. St. Paul had illumination. St. Paul had soul development, soul capacities. St. Paul had Christ consciousness. He really attained the place where he could say, I live, yet not I, Christ liveth as me. I can do all things through Christ. He had the conscious realization of the Christ so greatly, so completely, that he could live it. But he did not have it to the extent of either Jesus or Paul, because at no time did he drop his Hebrew religion in its entirety. At no time did he drop his complete state of humanhood. As a matter of fact, he complained himself that the good he didn't, and the evil that he would not, that's what he did. He was and had a thorn in the flesh. In other words, he had a great degree of Christ consciousness, but not enough to have really lifted him out of his humanhood. Now, Jesus and John both were lifted out of their humanhood. So there you had degrees of it. In the same way, you have in our modern day the example of Mrs. Fillmore. The first Mrs. Fillmore, the one who originated the unity movement. There's any question of doubt that there was a developed soul consciousness. There was a great soul consciousness. And when the spark struck her, it really opened her up. And she was highly developed. And that development made it possible for a woman of no talents, a woman of no business experience, a woman living in a little bit of a village, which Kansas City was at that time, to become internationally known and have an international organization such as the Unity Movement. No woman could have ever done that. No man could ever have done that. Starting from that kind of a basis, more especially no woman could. That had to have been the Spirit itself that took her over and did it. I had an experience in Boston very much along that line when I was called to the home of one of the men in the Mother Church, the Christian Science Mother Church, who had had a stroke. And on this particular night, it was midnight. The doctor, the nurse on the case, phoned me and said, Mr. Goldsmith, this man's going. You better come over here right away. And I went, and I sat by his bedside, and it was very evident that he was just having his last few minutes. And I just couldn't get the right feeling. I couldn't get the right atmosphere. I couldn't get the right sense sitting there. So I said to her, well, my sitting here isn't going to do any good. I'm going out walking, and I will end up at my apartment. If you want me, phone me. And as I went out, of course, I was working all the time. thinking, trying to establish myself in the principle. And his apartment was right next to that whole series of Mother Church buildings, the administration building, the Mother Church, and the great big new publishing house. And that's a tremendous piece of property there and a tremendous thing to look at. And as I passed that particular street and looked at those immense buildings representing millions and millions of dollars, I thought, if I just knew the secret that built those. I know right well that no woman, no New England woman back in the 1890s could be responsible for this. Maybe some woman today in our modern society could pull a trick like that, but back in the 1890s, a woman who at 60-odd years of age never had had $1,000 in her life, when she published the first edition of Science and Health, had to borrow $1,000 in order to publish it. And she's, no, that was Mrs. Eddy. What did it? What is the secret? What built this thing? Because whatever it is that built this thing could heal that man. If it could build up these temples, it could build up the temple of that body. And as I stood there just looking, wondering, all of a sudden it came, that passage in Scripture. The same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead will quicken also your mortal body. I saw right away, certainly. But Miss Eddy hadn't been imbued with that Spirit. If it hadn't caught her and picked her up, never think she could have built a worldwide organization. Never think she could have put up those millions of dollars worth of buildings. Why, she would have gone down in history unsung, unknown as a woman or as a man. It was a Spirit, the same Spirit that raised up Christianity, that said, my words will never die. That's the same Spirit that picked her up and put those buildings there that so in Science and Health is never going to die. And don't think we didn't have a miracle. We did. In the morning that man had turned, and in 3 months he was out walking. What did it? The same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ. Now, of course, Miss Eddy didn't have it, Mrs. Fillmore didn't have it in any such proportions as Jesus or John. Probably, I don't even know whether they had it in the degree that Paul had it. But they had it. Never fool yourself. They had it. Nobody can start out with no money in a small town, no backing, and absolutely antagonizing the whole human world with their teaching and conquer the world by having a worldwide organization. No human can do that. It has to be that same Spirit. So there are examples of two women, anyhow, who had soul capacities developed, who had this spiritual sense, who had received the Holy Ghost, who had been caught by the fire of Christ, and that Spirit animated them, and it was that Spirit that went before them to make the crooked places straight. It was that Spirit that overcame opposition. It was that Spirit that attracted to them just the help they needed in the form of printers, editors, teachers, practitioners, whatever was people with money to contribute, whatever was necessary for those women to have, they attracted to them. And it wasn't those women at all. Never a bit of it. It was the Spirit that had touched them, and they had become the instruments for it. And of course, if you know the real histories of both those women, you'll know that there never were two more humble women in all the world than those two women. They were humble in the true sense of humility, that they knew right well that without that Christ they could have done nothing. That it was it that did the work. You see what I mean? And so it is. The development of soul faculties really means the degree of the Christ that touches you. And when it touches you, it isn't you that does it. It isn't you. That's why I say the word I can be a devil if you're not careful. It isn't you that does it. It does it, and you're the vehicle through which it operates. It's the Spirit of God in man. It's that which we have. I said that this class was higher consciousness. The activity of Christ in individual consciousness. All right? That's exactly what I meant. As we come to that point of transition, when we're not just a human being, with human ingenuity, human intelligence, human physical strength, human mental or moral strength, human finances. When you get to that point of transition where the descent of the Holy Ghost comes, where the birth of the Christ comes, if you want to call it that, where the Spirit of God enters and takes over, when you come to that, you have made the transition out of humanhood while still in the flesh. One of our Hebrews said, I have seen God while yet in the flesh. While yet in the flesh, the Spirit of Christ came. This touch of the soul, this touch of super consciousness, if that's the word. And it takes over, and it inspires, and it illumines. And it goes out in the world and attracts to you those necessary to the fulfillment of the work. It's never for a selfish purpose. It's for the work's sake, for the activity of the Christ's sake. And so it is. It makes the crooked places straight. It prepares a way for you in the wilderness. It sets a table for you in the wilderness. It makes the manna fall from the sky. It opens Red Seas if they have to. And if you get crucified, it enables you to walk out of a tomb. What does? The touch of the Christ. And the only thing is, to what degree are we touched? Now then, Gautama, the Buddha, was illumined much in the same way as Jesus. Matter of degree. Who knows whether it was the same or a little less, but it was in that same category of realization. So was Lao Tse of China. He was a fully illumined man, a completely illumined man, completely God-conscious. Shankara of India was certainly a God-conscious, soul-illumined man. And so there have been many down the line, some in one degree and some in another. But that's the meaning of it. It's a God-consciousness, and the degree of God-consciousness determines the degree of the demonstration. When it takes over completely, the humanhood almost evaporates. The individual is almost lost to the human world with no interest in the things of this world. And yet every touch brings about an improvement in this world for somebody. I suppose the saddest thing in the world is that there isn't anything a person can do to get it, or to hasten it, or to increase it, except what we are all doing. Study some more, meditate some more, mingle with those that are on the same path, expose yourself to that same type of consciousness, and then wait patiently for the lightning to strike. There is no other way. It's a thing that happens. And as it happened to Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus, as it happened to Buddha under the Bodhi tree, nobody knows where or when it happened to Jesus, because history doesn't tell us, and probably the only ones who have the documents that could tell us is the Vatican. They've probably got all the documents hidden away so that nobody will ever find that and know when or where that happened or how. Whitman seems to have been born with it, Walt Whitman, because as we read, that even as a boy he was astounded at preachers and the minister in the church bringing God into the sermon, and always in the sense that God was contending or battling with other forces. In other words, even as a boy, Walt Whitman recommended that God must be supreme in all, and that there are no laws or powers for God to battle. Well, of course, the ministers in the church to this day doesn't know that. But Walt Whitman, as an illumined soul, knew it. Now then, Dr. Buck, who wrote Cosmic Consciousness, received his illumination from contact with Walt Whitman. Not that Walt Whitman knew that he had the power to bestow it. He probably didn't do it consciously. But just association with him resulted in it. And then from the day, and as you probably remember the story, that he was driving in this hack, this cab over in London at midnight, and while riding in the cab, all of a sudden the whole streets were illumined with light. And there he saw the whole soul of Walt Whitman and knew that he had made contact with the divine soul of Walt Whitman, the illumined soul of Walt Whitman, and so he received his illumination and his vision of the cosmic from that. And each one receives it in a different way. Each one receives it in a different time and for different purposes. They don't all receive it for the purpose of giving a religion to the world.
Realization of the divine being of yourself, or does it come? I can't understand just exactly.
Yes, it's a realization of the divine being. There's only one divine being, and that's the divine being of yourself.
It doesn't come from outside.
No, it comes from within.
Wake up.
No, you wake up to something within your own being. It couldn't be outside because there is no outside of you. There's no outside of you. This whole world is inside of you. It's all inside of your mind, inside of your consciousness. You're absolutely infinite. There's no limitation to your consciousness. And as wide as you open it, if you only know English, it's only because you have limited yourself. If you want to know 8 languages or 16, you can. Why? Because you can embrace...
In the general phraseology, the metaphysicians give the impression that it's dual, that it comes...
Well, I mean, that may be language, but the point is that it's a realization of the infinite nature of your own consciousness. That's what it is. There's only one consciousness, that's cosmic consciousness, that's your consciousness. But instead of our having access to it, we have access only to one tiny little corner of a trained mind, of an educated mind, or a mind built up in environment. Now, as you study spiritual things, you break through deeper and deeper and deeper, and you catch different layers and different stratas of spiritual sense until the day comes when the whole thing opens. Actually, the Hindu says that it's like an onion. Peel after peel of the onion skin comes off, and so little at a time and so thin that you don't know it. But all of a sudden you get down and there's nothing left. And when there's nothing left, that's all. Sure, when there's nothing left of the human mind, the reasoning mind, the thinking mind, there's nothing left but the cosmic, the universal. And you realize that's the only mind there is, and it's yours.
Of initiation to illumination.
For some. For some. Oh, yes. 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 And some bring it into this world with them. Oh, yes, there are steps for some. Initiation isn't a step to illumination. Initiation is usually an experience that comes after illumination. The illumination entitles one to the initiation. On the other hand, it has been known that people had it by degrees and called that initiation. They were initiated step by step. But actual initiation into the inner world usually comes after some measure of illumination. Conflict with it? I don't think it conflicts with any Christian teaching in the world. Oh, there are several points of difference. The Christian Science has a divine mind, an immortal mind, and a mortal mind. Christian Science has a God and a man. And Christian Science says that we are entirely spiritual. And then it gives you protective work against some kind of evil. It says it's based on the first commandment of only one power, and then it does protective work against certain kinds of evils. I know, but then it does protective work against it, doesn't it? And teaches a lot of protective work, too, against some forms of evil. And actually, if you could take Mrs. Eddy's writings apart, you would find that through her life, she had touched the whole of the spiritual ministry. And you could go through her writings and pick out the most wonderful spiritual teaching in the world. The only thing is that her writings now consist both of those spiritual revelations and the original mental revelations. And that brings up the inconsistency that is causing the difficulty in the movement. Besides a few other inconsistencies, like the Mother Church doesn't have any communion service, but branch churches do have a communion service. All right, that's kind of setting aside two kinds of people even in the one church. I think Ms. Eddy says in the manual the members of my church do not need communion, but the members of the Portland church do. Okay? There are things like that. Then there are strict statements about the fact that there should be no formulas of any kind, that everything must come by inspiration. And then we have the Lord's Prayer, the daily prayer, there's 3 or 4 different prayers, all of which are formulas, because they're made-up prayers that are just recited. So and so and so. There are many differences there, and yet the heart and soul of Christian Science is based on absolute truth. But it was a gradual unfoldment from the mental up to the spiritual, and some of the mental still remains. And it is in trying to separate those that the students are having difficulty. I can illustrate that for you this way. That on one page it says, ignorance, sin, and fear is the procuring cause and foundation of all disease. 8 pages later it says, neither disease itself, sin, nor fear has the power to cause disease or relapse. And there's another page where it says that mortal mind causes disease. Immortal mind cures it. But there's another page where it says the term mortal mind is a solecism denoting nothingness. There is no mortal mind. See what I mean? Another place it says you must first remove the fear of the patient, then you can heal the disease. But then miscellaneous writing says, can a condition that's been healed in Christian Science return through sin or fear? And the answer is no. Neither sin nor fear can bring on disease or bring back disease, since there is in reality no disease. But you see, in mental healing, mental treatment illustrated, you first heal the disease. Now, the reason for all that isn't that Mrs. Eddy was confused. It was that when Mrs. Eddy began with the mental science, which she did, as you can very well tell as you go back to the early editions, she left in her writing some of those old mental things, thinking that the people couldn't catch the absolute spiritual thing. Then by the time she was ready to give them the absolute spiritual, they couldn't take it because they were indoctrinated with the old mental. And so the day must come in Christian Science, if they really want to go forward, when they'll have to do one of 2 things. They'll either have to rewrite the books and leave out the mental part of it, and some of the manual part of it, or they'll have to do what some of them are doing, use the infinite way for their textbook on healing and leave out all those mental approaches. Stick with the scripture.
As you know, this question was to bring out some of the differences between Christian Science and the infinite way. And of course, actually, there is as much difference as between day and night. Since the entire teaching of the infinite way is a raising of oneself above the human sense of existence into spiritual consciousness, rather than merely improving the human scene by improving health or wealth. It is not a neglecting of human health and human wealth, but permitting these to be the added things, that is, the things that are added and unfolded once one has attained their conscious communion with God. While on this point, let me ask all students of the infinite way to come to that place in consciousness where they do not criticize, judge, or condemn any race or religion on earth, or the members, or the leaders, or founders, or revelators of such religions. You see, the Christ revealed that before Abraham was, I am, or before Abraham was I am. And also, I will be with you unto the end of the world. Now, this great truth of God's omnipresence must reveal that the realization of God is an individual matter for you and for me. And it has nothing to do with whether you come into that realization through one teaching or another. The object of life is to come into conscious oneness with God. Now, we are living in a precarious age. The world is sitting on a volcano. And one thing alone can save it. Perhaps nothing can save it. But one thing alone can save you, and can save me, and can save those who wish to be saved. And that is their attainment of spiritual realization and demonstration. That can only come in proportion as we see and understand that God is one power, one presence, within you, within me, and that the major teachings of the world have come to reveal this. Not to set men at war with each other, not to have Catholic churches and Protestant churches fighting each other, not to have Hebrew churches and Christians fighting each other, not to have various schools of metaphysics warring with each other. Oh no, the purpose of every founder was to reveal God. It is true that students of these original founders have set up institutions that would seem to be at variance with each other, but that was never the intent or purpose of the original revelators. Now let me show you something. I want to share this with you. This comes to us from Jesus the Christ. I come not to destroy the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them. I'm sure you're going to find before I get through here that every great religious founder will agree that they have not come to destroy some other church or some other teaching, or to make comparisons, or to criticize or judge or condemn, but they have come to reveal the law, and to reveal the law of all the prophets of all times, and to fulfill them. Of this, Krishna says, in varying ways, the sages have described the same unvarying and essential truths. There is no real conflict twixt them all. The knowers know the way to reconcile. And Muhammad says, this that I am now uttering unto you, the Holy Koran, it is to be found within the ancient seers' writings too. For teachers have been sent to every race. Zoroaster. And we worship the former religions of the world devoted to righteousness. Listen to this one of Buddha. Be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Love as brethren. Be pitiful. Be courteous, not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing. You would imagine you were listening to St. Paul. And indeed, that is exactly what St. Paul said. Listen, be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. If thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. I wonder if you will really believe that this next is a psalm of David. Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walketh uprightly and worketh righteousness, and speaketh the truth in his heart. He that backbiteth not with his tongue, nor doeth evil to his neighbor, nor taketh up a reproach against his neighbor. Really doesn't say a word there, does it, that only Hebrews are God's chosen people? Not a word there that only the followers of Christ can enter in. Oh no, he realized the universal nature of God. Those who enter the tabernacle of God, that is heaven, those who shall dwell in his holy hill, are they that walketh uprightly and worketh righteousness, speaketh truth in his heart, in any age, in any church, and in no church. And our great Lao Tse of China, the greatest conquerors are those who overcome their enemies without strife. The greatest directors of men are those who yield place to others. Now, students, you see the unity of all the great religious teachings of the world. Undoubtedly, there are some churches and institutions that do not adhere to these teachings, that give more attention to certain doctrinal beliefs, creedal beliefs, forms, ceremonies. But you and I have nothing to do with these, and certainly no criticism for them, since they too must be fulfilling a mission on their level of consciousness. We, as those who are seeking and finding communion with God, are interested only in the universal principles, such as we have seen here embodied in all of the major religious faiths. Now, from this we must gather one point, and that is that in the understanding of oneness alone, there is God-conscious power. Only in the realization of God as one, and furthermore, only in the realization of God as individual. God as individual soul of you. God as the individual soul, life, of your friend and of your enemy. Only in this realization of oneness is there God-conscious power. I have witnessed this, and therefore I give it to you as a teaching. The power of God will flow through you, out from you, as a blessing, as a benediction to all who touch you on life's highway, in proportion as you understand God as one. Understand God as one power, not as the power of good over evil, not as the power of truth over error, not as the power of love over hate. No. Understand God as one infinite power, and that power good. Then do you individualize God-conscious power. Understand God as the life of individual man. Understand God as the life and principle of the animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms. And do not see God overcoming, saving, or protecting, but see God as one, infinite, individual, all harmonious being, and that being, the being of all mankind, of the entire animal world, mineral and vegetable world. God as one. I have seen this in the experience of every mystic I have known, that softness, gentleness, patience, forbearance just oozed out of them, just flowed through them. And then I learned the answer. Since they realize God as the only power, they have nothing left to fear, no one to hate. Isn't it wonderful? Aloha, aloha, Joel.